I've been procrastinating making the beginner's budget list for a little bit. It was one of my more popular videos back in September. So we're going to be going over my favorite budget decks for beginners that have no rares and no mythics, specifically to help beginners out. And I'll give you upgrades if they are available, kind of where you can kind of aim to take the deck. And do keep in mind that the standard rotation is happening in September. So we're going to be losing Neon Dynasty, and that's one of the big ones. You can always check out What's in Standard is a pretty good website. I'll put it in the description. That will kind of help you figure out which sets are going to not be in Standard after the Q4 in sometime around in September. So with that, let's get started. My number one list for beginners is Mono Blue Tempo, and there are a fair amount of the cards that are going to be rotating out though, so keep that in mind. There is one rare in the list, which is Otawara. You do not need this card, especially because it is rotating out when Neon Dynasty leaves, but you can replace it with just an island, and that will be just fine. The rest of it is all just commons and uncommons. I've seen several people pilot this deck with over a 60% win rate into Mythic, and it's centered around making a turn 1 play with Network Disruptor, Ginger Brute, Spyglass Siren, and then setting up a ninjutsu with either Prosperous Thief or the Moon Circuit Hacker. I do have a video on this if you would like to see the gameplay to kind of see how the deck functions. You've also got artifact synergies with the Zoetic Glyph, being able to reanimate an artifact. Retrofitter can also make an artifact into a creature. It's relatively beginner friendly because, outside of the ninjutsu mechanic, it's pretty straightforward. And you do have some interesting lines and some interesting decisions to make. And it's a pretty good introduction to Magic the Gathering and has a high, performs well for a budget deck. Second up is Simic Cookies, and this is a budget version that I found on MTGA Zone. And the point of this one is to have artifact synergies. So you're looking at like Welcome to Sweet Tooth makes a food token. You've got Ginger Brute, which is an artifact creature. Spyglass Siren makes the map token. Case of the Filched Falcon makes a clue token when it enters the battlefield. Might is a cheap artifact creature. Hard-hitting Question is really your best removal in Simic. And then we've got the Shipwreck Sentry that as long as an artifact entered the battlefield, then it can attack as though it didn't have Defender. Tough Cookie and Ginger Brute are kind of the cards that make it called Simic Cookies. And then you've got the Unctus's Retrofitter, which similarly to the Mono Blue Tempo deck, you can turn your artifacts into 4/4s. And same with the Zoetic Glyph. And then you got Hollow Scavenger, which can create a food token as an adventure and then turns into a 3/2 that can sacrifice that food to get +2/+2 until end of turn. And then the Welcome to Sweet Tooth has more synergies I didn't get into. Not only does it create a human and a food token, but then it gives a creature +X counters, where X is the number of foods that you control specifically. So these do count as food. It's not just food tokens, so any food creatures like your cookies synergize with Welcome to Sweet Tooth. So this one is a nice beginner friendly deck list, but this one also does have an upgrade into the Simic Cookies list that I just covered for my 50 match best of one summary as of Outlaws of Thunder Junction. So this is kind of the more competitive deck in the best of one scene. It's kind of a tier 2 deck because it does lose pretty hard to Boros Convoke. So depending on how much Boros Convoke is in the meta, it's definitely not one of the top performing best of one decks, but I really enjoyed it. And so the upgrades here are the Teething Wormlet, which gets +1/+1 and gains you life every time that an artifact enters the battlefield. This one being particularly useful for against mono red because of the life gain stabilization. We've got the Lost Jite, which I was exploring. I wouldn't say that every Simic Cookies list is running this one. So if you do craft this, do this knowing that you're doing that because it is a mythic. And so you could largely leave that one out. The Surge Engine is a pretty staple one, but it is also a mythic, just being able to give you that unblockable creature. The Subterranean Schooner is one that is you see in more decks. So the Surge Engine and the Teething Wormlet are kind of specific to this deck, whereas the Subterranean Schooner has seen play in other decks, although it has fallen out of popularity. And then we've got the Agatha's Soul Cauldron, and this one there's a couple of combo decks that were built around Agatha's Soul Cauldron, and you kind of see it come and go. It's definitely not one that's super common in the meta and is also a mythic. And then we've got Kitesail Larcenist, which helps improve the removal from just the hard-hitting question, being able to turn something into a treasure token. And then we've got the Sentinel of the Nameless City, and this one, creating a map token every single time you attack, helps you get the artifact synergies. So this is the list that I think is probably the best, but it is a fair amount of mythics and rares. And then you can improve upon the lands. Again, Otawara and Boseiju are going to be rotating out with Neon Dynasty, so keep that in mind that they will be gone later this year. But then like Botanical Sanctum, the Dreamroot Cascade, Restless Vinestalk, Yavmaya Coast, all of these are pretty good crafts because as long as you care about playing in the Simic space, they improve your mana base, and they're more likely to be seen in other Simic decks. So I tend to craft the lands pretty highly, and recommend that to beginners that if you're gonna play it for the long haul, that you're gonna want to look to craft lands, because it dramatically improves your deck to do so. And then Mythics is another one that we see a lot. So this one, because of being able to repeatedly make a 1/1 artifact creature token with Toxic, this is a classic that is difficult for Control to deal with. So of all of the rares and all of the mythics in this list, I think that Mythics is relatively high up on the cards that I would craft first. This is another one of my favorite beginner budget builds. So this, again, only being commons and uncommons. I grabbed this one from MTGA Zone. JTOS Josh was the one who I saw build it first. And they've got a new person working at MTGA Zone doing their budget lists and such. But it looks largely the same to what I've covered in the past. We did get the Cryosate Heath in Outlaws of Thunder Junction, and that helps us fix at a cheaper than the rare lands. But the whole point here is to deal damage as well as toxic damage. So toxic deals poison damage to your opponent, and a poison counter, if your opponent gets to 10 poison counters, they lose the game. So whenever you attack with a creature with toxic, it gets +1/+1 until end of turn with Slaughter Singer. And so you're attacking for both damage as well as toxic. So it gives you two different ways to win the game. And then, yeah, all of your little creatures here giving you toxic, hitting for both damage as well as poison. Double Strike hits your opponent twice, so if it does hit, you're going to give them 1 poison counter for each time that you hit them, so this will give them 2 poison counters if it's unblocked. Tyvar Stand can be used to fizzle one of our opponent's removals and protect our creatures. Audacity gives us trample so that we can get through a blocker. Destroy Evil is just for targeted removal. You could also run like something like Ossification. And we've got Annex Sentry, which helps us remove our opponent's blockers. The Flencing Raptor, which fits into the whole theme. So this is kind of one of those, Phyrexia All Will Be One had a lot of toxic creatures, and so this is leaning pretty heavily into that entire set. Audacity is from a different one, but very much all from Phyrexia All Will Be One, which is kind of nice if it comes available again on like a quick draft. You can get a lot of the commons and uncommons that way, and then you have a pretty good budget deck for running dailies. The upgraded version of this and the more competitive version of this one is in the white, blue, green space at the moment. There has been some stuff done with strictly green-white, but right now the favored approach is to go for blue-white and splash green for the Venerated Rot Priest. And to be able to do this 3-color nonsense, we're going to be leaning into some of our... it taxes the mana base, and so the mana base is relatively important. The Seed Core being one that's very specific to this deck and this deck alone, so if you do craft that, keep in mind that you're not going to see the Seed Core being played elsewhere. Mythics, though, showing up again, a pretty good one to craft that goes into multiple decks. Then we've got the kind of Simic fixing that I already covered, and Thran Portal. This one, take it with a grain of salt. Some people like Thran Portal, some people don't. It's kind of like it's a necessary evil. So I like Thran portals. I think that they help ensure that you have the right colors of mana, especially if you have attacks where you need to have, for example, in this deck, you need blue, white, and green on turn 1, at least some of the time. So, and then the other thing too is that most of these decks I've been talking about have been best of 1. I pulled a best of 3 list here because Bant Toxic is not performing particularly well in best of 1. Again, it struggles a little bit with the Boros Convoke, and which we will cover here shortly. And so keep that in mind, that if you are going to craft this deck, that its sweet spot is in best of 3 as opposed to best of 1. And I did I did grab a budget list that from MTGA Zone that gives a pretty good base for the Boros Convoke strategy. And so we're going to replace some of the more expensive cards, bring in like the Burning Sun's Fury, which allows us to give this board pump to all of our tiny 1/1 tokens. We've got the Halo Hopper, which allows you to tap your creatures instead of mana to be able to play out. Kind of helps with the go wide theme. Destroy Evil again here could be something like ossification or some form of removal, just trying to increase the interaction in the deck. And then a lot of the, like Case of the Gateway Express, Frontliner, Inspector, Demolition, Epicure, Recruiter, they're all actually in the upgraded version. And then we have Stoke the Flames, which fits into the go wide Convoke strategy and gives us a little bit of reach. So this is the 0 rares build. And then you can upgrade it into this, which I think is my preferred list of the Boros Convoke, running a 4-2 split of the Case of the Gateway Express and the War Leader's Call. War Leader's Call really helps you against the temporary lockdown decks. Anything that's running control, then War Leader's Call is going to be able to ping that damage every time that a creature comes in and eventually win you the game. Sanguine Evangelist is a one that we see kind of fluctuate. Sometimes it's not included, so I like it in mono white humans though too, so it does see play in other decks. Being able to pump your board as it attacks, and then also when it dies, spawning a 1/1 token is pretty handy. Warden of the Inner Sky is another one that I like to play in the mono white humans that works well with having the Convoke to give you the +1/+1 counter and a scry so that you can smooth your draws. And then the Charming Scoundrel is a one of. This one is not particularly important, although it does see play in mono red aggro. And but I enjoyed the addition of this one. And the Knight Errant of Eos, I think, is the most critical card as far as improving the Boros Convoke, because it helps you rebuild and refill your hand. So being able to do this as early as turn 2 off of a Gleeful Demolition, being able to, even if they wipe their board, you still drew into additional threats. Knight Errant of Eos is one of the critical cards in Boros Convoke. And then we also see Mirix, again, very popular pick. Cavern of Souls, anytime that you're in the mono white humans or there's a lot of humans in this Boros Convoke list, you're going to start seeing Cavern of Souls, which helps prevent your stuff from getting countered. This one I do think is around to stay for the next 3 years, so it's probably worth crafting at some point. And then we have Inspiring Vantage to help smooth the land, same with Battlefield Forge. Sokenzan, again, is rotating out in September, and same with the Gonjo. So the legendary lands you may want to hold off on if you are, just starting Magic, and you can craft them if you're looking to play the deck a lot in the next 3 months. Another budget option is Gruul Prowess, and this one leaning into green just for the Aloe Alchemist and Audacity and the Snakeskin Veil. So Snakeskin Veil really being handy for the Prowess decks because they struggle a little bit with the interaction from our opponent. So we can fizzle something that's getting targeted with, as long as we have the Snakeskin Veil up. But we're trying to end up dealing a whole bunch of damage in one turn. And you're going to see, if you do look at my best of 1 meta reviews, the mono red Prowess and the Rakdos Prowess are pretty common, and actually relatively cheap to build. So a pretty good option for beginners. But this one bringing in some uncommons that we have seen kind of sneak into some lists. So like Kenra's Spellspear, you can flip this even without blue mana. Phyrexian mana can be paid with 2 life instead. And then you get double prowess and can push a lot of damage with your spells. Same with the Electrostatic Infantry. This one's a pretty good budget option. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, put a +1/+1 counter on Electrostatic Infantry. Grows into a large trampling threat. the Ancestral Anger and Kumano and Swift Spears, Monstrous Rage, Play with Fire, these are all key cards that are going to be in the upgraded list as well. Witchstalker Frenzy sees a lot of play in mono red, and then we've got the Bristling Backwoods is a nice budget option for fixing in the green-red space. And I could put the Gruul Prowess deck here, but I think that, especially because I'm trying to be as beginner-friendly as possible, I think that if you're going to craft in this archetype and you like what it's doing, then you should probably look towards mono red, at least in best of one. And the reason for that being is that it just performs better than the Gruul archetype. And you can take aspects of the Gruul Prowess deck that was at common and uncommon and play it in mono red. There is a budget build. You're going to have a difficult time closing without Slickshot Show Off. So this one is the new one that we got at Outlaws of Thunder Junction. If you're in the Prowess space, you're probably going to want to craft the Slickshot Show Off. I do think that the Gruul Combat Tricks deck can lean off of Picnic Ruiner and doesn't need the Slickshot Show Off. And to some extent, the Boros burn, or sorry, the Rakdos burn deck that I've covered a couple weeks ago, because of leaning into Cacophony Scamp and Picnic Ruiner. I know it's a lot to take in right now, but Slickshot Show Off is definitely going to be around, I think, for a while, being able to kind of give new life to what mono red is becoming, which looks a little bit more spell heavy. If that changes, though, then Slickshot Show Off isn't going to be seeing a lot of play, so it kind of it's in a niche spot right now, but it's a very top performing deck. And the Fugitive Codebreaker, to a lesser extent, is nice to craft for the Prowess space. And then Kumano Faces Kakazan is an uncommon that we're gonna see go away. That's gonna dramatically shift the meta, because this one has been very key to defining the pace of mono red. So this one's gonna be very, very missed in September when it rotates. So you may want to wait on the mono red space until after September. I will be revisiting all of these after the rotation, but I tried to do one kind of at rotation and then one 6 months later, and I fell a little bit behind my schedule because a lot of the previous budget lists are no longer in the meta, right? Let's see, anything that I missed? Oh yeah, Squee is definitely one that has seen a lot of play in mono red and is a difficult one to remove because you can exile cards to bring it back. So the recurring threat of Squee, I imagine, we'll continue to see this one until rotation. And then Godric, Cloaked Reveler, is another one that, as long as you're in mono red, seems to be a pretty good mainstay. Again, I can't predict what's going to happen in September, but for at least for the next 3 months, I can vouch for this deck. So I hope that helps you understand some options that you have for the common and uncommon space. And I know that Magic the Gathering is not the most friendly to beginners, so if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. I do love help. You know, I love to help people enjoy the game that I have loved for over 25 years. So good luck with your matches, and let me know what you think in the comments below. And again, yeah, feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Take care.